sure people have tons of questions.
You got that deck though, right?
I do. I don't think I'm gonna do it. I don't think I'm gonna run in through it. I think it's better to just, you know what? Here, how about this? We'll start with that. Can
Awesome.
everyone see that?
Yep. You're
All
good
right.
to go. Leave it to Rob to be the very first gem startup reveal. Maybe we'll do these again in the future. We'll see how this one goes.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Drew.
I
So
hope so.
what's the since it's the very first one? Do you want to open do a little intro, or should I just launch in? What you tell me?
I think you should just get into it. I mean, I think most people on this call know your background.
Yeah,
Most of these people, I mean, not everyone is in Gem, but there's some guests in here. Uh, so yeah, I would just say, I
sure.
mean, the context for me is super interesting project, uh, built by someone that knows this space probably better than anyone. And yeah, I'll give you
All
the
right.
floor to tell everyone what you've been working on for what, a year plus?
A year
How,
plus. Yeah.
yeah.
So first of all, hey, thanks everybody for coming. I know like when Drew and I came with this idea, it's like, would anyone show up? And even last night, Sonny and I were saying this could end up being like just our dev team and Drew. So I appreciate the interest. So basically, on screen, I've shared what I've been working on and been sort of obsessed with for the past, gosh, I don't know, probably since the start of 21. As some of you know, I've been pretty involved with the whole blockchain, subgroup, I guess, within Gem. This is a deep dive I started doing. And at the end of it, this is sort of the product, the project that we've come up with. Basically, Decentre Labs, we have built a.
Said he sent it. He sent it once and
Hypoth-
it password, so he said he's sending it again with no
Hello?
password.
Okay. So this is Decentre Labs. That's the name of the company. I just threw it up here because so you guys could, go visit it now that we are sort of getting more and more public. This is what we're building. And this is really the project that I thought I would introduce to you guys. Decentre Property Exchange is basically an open online auction platform for real estate. But that also happens to be a multiple listing service because it's the only way that you can actually do transparent online auctions in real estate the way things are today. As I mentioned, there are links to the concept deck, links to the white paper, so feel free to check it out. But this is the site. So what is it? I mean, it's exactly what you would imagine it to be, right? It's and part of this is, something that I think a lot of us who've been in the industry for, pretty much all our careers have talked about in the past, which is that the most efficient, effective way to actually buy and sell houses is probably through open bidding auction. Where buyers know exactly where they are, sellers kind of see where things are. It's just technology really wasn't at that point, when kind of the industry began. And there have been a number of companies that have tried it and it sort of never worked. And when I thought about it, I think from my standpoint, it came down to why so many difficulties with auctions in real estate in the United States? Because we know this works, in other countries. Like Australia, I think they sell something like 40% of all homes are sold through auction. Why doesn't it work here? And the answer I sort of came up with is that the multiple listing service exists in the US, which kind of alleviated the need for that for, I don't know, a good 40, 50 years. But as a result, by the time we got to, post-internet, it made it a little bit harder. It made it, in fact, kind of nearly impossible to do an open auction project for real estate. So we looked at a lot of different things, and it basically came down to, I think the only way that we can do auctions is actually to just launch the entire site as a multiple listing service to begin with. So that's what we have. I mean, I could go through some of this stuff. If you guys have questions, my thought was I pull it up, sort of walk through how things might work. But there are a few key features to this. So the first thing is, in order to do something like this, you have to create some incentive, right, for people to use a site like this. And I think there are two. Number one is, how do you get listings? How do you get people, average users, so not bank foreclosures, not super high-end luxury real estate because concierge auctions exist? How do you get regular people and their agents to decide to put their house up for auction? And it was sort of it was a kind of an accident of timing, I think, that we decided, with all of the sort of trouble and the legal problems that we're having in the industry around commissions, I thought a good way of sort of defending compensation at the same time creating this incentive is to move commissions from the seller to the buyer, right? So as an auction house, we charge a buyer premium. We charge a buyer premium that's 5%. And in exchange, and then we take the 5% and we guarantee compensation to the agents involved. So we, the MLS, I suppose, we, the auction house, after closing, will ensure that the listing agent and the buyer agent get paid. What that does, though, is it shifts the commission from the seller to the buyer, and now the seller has a rather large incentive to put their listings on DPX. And there's a fairly large incentive for the listing agent to put the listings on DPX. Because we're an MLS, obviously, we have data feeds available for anyone who wants data out of our system. So we'll go to, all the agent websites, all the portals, and the internet is really how people find listings, how people find, homes that they might want to purchase. So that kind of eventually will take care of the buy side demand, because that's the other problem that auction websites have, is how do you let buyers know that this home exists? So by having solved those two, we thought, let's launch this thing. The blockchain component comes in really handy in one aspect. It's really behind the scenes. We're not like a crypto project, really. We're only using that in, and the example that I used in recently was, it's almost like saying that we're built on MongoDB, or use, React framework. Nobody cares, right? Only sort of the technologist backend people care about that. And Web3 sort of serves that same function. But the one thing that it does do for what we've built is it allows us to operate effectively what is a multiple listing service with direct governance, right? Through governance tokens and through DAO mechanisms, we can actually allow each individual agent, each individual user to have a role in setting the rules of this exchange, which is not something that exists, quite frankly, in the industry right now. And in fact, I don't think it exists outside of sort of the crypto space anywhere that I'm aware of right now. Let's see, what else can I tell you? What are the other innovative features? There's a whole bunch. Oh, the one last point, because this gets asked almost every time. If we are charging a buyer premium, wouldn't the buyer sort of resent that? Wouldn't they have a problem with it? One of the key features of DPX is on the agent side, both the listing agent and the buyer agent, they do have to agree to waive all their commissions if the transaction is sold through DPX, because we're going to pay them. So you don't get to double dip. You don't get to say, hey, pay me from the buyer premium, and also through the MLS, I'm owed, this commission. You don't get to do that. What that means is, for the consumer, this is effectively no more expensive than the real estate transactions today, right? Whereas most auction sites, in fact, all the auction sites that I'm aware of, you still have the commission burden, and then you have to pay a buyer premium on top of it. I think concierge auction is sort of the best example of that, where the buyer premium could be as high as 12% on top of commission. So it's a pretty expensive proposition. And DPX, it's financially, economically neutral. What does this do? A couple of things. Our primary goal, is to really drive transparency, right? And the whole notion behind some of the innovations, some of the problems that we have in the industry, I really felt was the lack of transparency. And this isn't just to consumers, it's to agents. Excuse me. So think about the last, 2020, 2021, where buyer agents were writing dozens of offers and just getting them, turned down, and they had no idea why, right? Once in a while, sure, the listing agent might tell you, hey, you got outbid. Well, how much did we get outbid by? Oh, you got outbid by 5,000. My client would have paid 10. But, think these sorts of things we know happened and continue to happen. On the seller side, the lack of transparency means that you often end up with sort of this game, and we all know it, right? Where the listing agent goes in, says, hey, I think your home is worth this. The seller is resistant. So you have to list it and then do this like price reduction talk, this painful conversation all the time. And then even after all that, you just wonder, did I actually get market price? And they get pissed off. There's all sorts of issues and problems around the lack of transparency. And I thought this helps to really try and address that. So let me stop there because I'm sure people have questions. And, you know, like I said, I'm not going to walk through some deck or anything. And
You
see
want to
what you
open up
think.
a listing page?
What's that?
Or
Yeah.
Can you open up like a specific listing on here?
Sure. So now this is our staging site, right? So our live, we have one listing. It is kind of because we're in pretty early beta. You know, as Drew mentioned, we've been sort of stealth because, you know, we need to build it. We need to launch it. So if you go to the actual decentrepx.com, you will see one actual live listing from our launch partner in Phoenix, George Lawton team. You can go bid on that right now. But for the purpose of sort of showing you guys, I figured I'd use our staging. So a lot of this data is not going to be correct. We just made this up, but this is sort of how things look. Okay. Oh, that's right. The other key thing, I forgot to mention this. One of the things that makes auctions really difficult for real estate, right, is unlike cars, unlike widgets, it's not just the money, right? So if you're to even bring a trailer, right, it tends to be just about the price of the car. So it's fairly easy to conduct an auction that way. With housing, with real estate, there are all these terms that are really important to both the buyer and the seller that aren't just monetary. So for example, you know, close of escrow. Are you closing in 15 days versus 45? That makes a difference. Is this an all cash offer? Is this a FHA offer? That makes a difference. Are you waiving appraisal? Are you, you know, there's all these terms, right? So one of the things we ended up doing is we allow the seller and the listing agent to essentially attach a dollar value to that. It does not go to the purchase price, but it does go to the value of the bid. So that allows the buyer to know exactly how they would have to bid. So it's not like you're necessarily going to bid by cash alone. You could say, you know what, and I could show you sort of that in action. I need to beat the current high bid by $10,000. The seller has said that all cash offers are worth 15 to him. So I'm going to make the same offer, but make it all cash, you know, so as an example. And that allows for strategic conversation between the buyer and the buyer agent and the seller and the listing agent. And that happens sort of upfront. So that's what these contract terms are, right? At the end of the process, what we would do is we would issue either a memorandum of understanding with all of the terms that have been agreed to in the course of bidding, or in some states, and this isn't Arizona yet, it'll be coming, we probably could just issue the entire sales contract ready for signature. From contract to close, everything remains exactly the same way it is today. We're not trying to say you're buying houses crypto. We're not trying to say this title on the blockchain. It's none of that. It's just a way to ensure we have transparency on all sides. Buyer, seller meet. Here's the contract. Here are the terms. You know, and then go through from contract to close the standard way, and we'll go through escrow, we go through title, and it's a process that we all understand and know.
Can you
Sam has
demo
his
a
hand
listing
up.
and an offer?
What's that?
Can you hey, it's Steve Winans. Can you demo a listing and an offer, or at least modify a listing so we can see what you're talking about
Sure.
there?
So let me log in here.
Sorry to jump in front of you, Sam. I didn't use my hand raising thing. So if you want to do
Well,
Sam's question first,
you're
I'll
gonna,
defer.
you can't go to recess and you're not gonna get your juice.
So
I
you
deserve
would just
that.
want to see how adding a listing looks like. It's pretty normal, right? You know, so you would here, we do ask you to upload a listing agreement because we need to verify that you have the right to do it. But we're going to say you did. You could add a co-listing agent if you want. And then just start typing in some address. You know, West Glendale. Let's say it's this, the white one. And here we're pulling. So hit next, you say, okay, yep, that's the right one. And by the way, I do want to say, we're pretty young, you know, so the UI, the design, you know, it is what it is. We're going to be improving that as we go. So we normally pull public records details, and then you just go through and fill it out. Right. This is listing entry that everyone is used to. And then you upload photos. You could put a video link, 3D tour links, what have you. Attach. It's a pretty standard listing entry process. Do you want to see?
And then at some point you assign those dollar values to the special terms.
Oh yeah. So you know what? Let me actually go through that. Let me just go next. All right. So one of the things here is at the end of that process, we know that agents do this today, right? Where they'll even do things like print out the MLS form and send it to the seller just to verify, hey, make sure I got everything right. We're just saying just send it directly to seller. So I'm going to have to do that real quick. So. Wait.
Because the reason I asked this was I've got my realtor hat on, and I was just wondering when that conversation happened, saying, "Hey, no inspection's worth 1,000 here, or it's worth 10,000 here." And then sometimes you think, why is it worth 10,000? Are there 10,000 worth of problems? No, might be 20. So this is just your insurance kind of. And so that's just the listing conversation that's going to create friction and be kind of strange. And then on my seller side, my client, as I'm a listing agent, they're going to say, oh, this is worth 1,000. How come I didn't get 1,000? And there's just I'm worried about how my client would perceive that and the end experience. And so that's why.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's going to be a little bit of work ahead of time, right? Where you would have to go to the seller and sort of explain this to them, right? But the dollar value thing, we went back and forth. We said, should we do points? Should we do? And we went dollar value because this is the feedback we had from sort of the agents we were working with in order to launch this thing. And I'm sorry, while I'm talking, let me just see if anyone on my team is on this call, could you go in and just do the seller approval, please? So I could actually answer questions. So one of the things that came down to was today, this is sort of the process that they go through today. Let's say you're in a multiple offer situation, you have two different offers and they're about the same. One is waiving appraisal, the other one's not. And the conversation the listing agent would have with the seller is, hey, listen, is this worth it to you? Is this worth the difference in cost? And they would actually put it in those dollar terms. You would net this much less, but they would waive appraisal. Is that worth it to you? So we just thought, you know what, have that conversation ahead of time. And this is an excellent opportunity. That's a place I think where the listing agent would provide enormous value because the client's going to have any idea, right? I mean, the question is going to be, okay, well, what should that be worth to me? And I think that's when the agent could, sort of say, listen, based on my experience, based in this area, I think waiver appraisal might be worth $1,000, or in this case, because of whatever issues you have with your particular home, if they're willing to waive appraisal, it's $10,000. So we're not dictating any of that. That's up to the listing agent and the seller. I'm hoping that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Drew, do you want to do the list of questions, or should I just start calling people?
Well, Sam has. Let's do Sam first, and then Derek.
Okay. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for presenting. So I look at this and I think I have a hunch for what this does for the industry as a whole. I think it's different from what you might be thinking.
Okay.
But just devil's advocate, what would you say to this if I said that this looks like a solution looking for a problem?
I mean, I guess it depends on what the problem is. To me, the lack of transparency is a problem.
That's solved. There's half a dozen platforms out there right now that will make offers transparent. You got to start a parallel MLS, you got to have a much better reason than that.
Well, I think so. There are many problems we're solving. I don't actually think that those aren't really transparent, right? Because they're still relatively closed. You don't really get to see it all. And furthermore, the other issue is you still end up paying more. It still ends up costing you more, right? So it still ends up something where as a buyer, as a seller, it's like, do I really want to do that? No, the current process works just fine, or at least I'm not willing to pay for it. With this, it costs the exact same, and it's going to give you the full transparency that you want, right?
I think there's
some other aspects as well. So on the MLS piece of things, I do think one of the challenges we have in the industry right now is the MLS, especially if cooperation and compensation, goes away, and I think there's a really decent chance that it does, what do we do then, right?
Yeah,
To me, this is the way forward for the MLS as well.
Yeah, because now you're getting into a meaty subject. Like if this was just about bringing transparency to building, man, making a parallel MLS and making people enter a listing twice, there's a hell of a lot easier way to do that. Even your argument about cost, the seller just push the cost back on the listing agent. So what? Done. Problem solved. To me, I think you're getting closer to it. But what I actually like about what I see is this makes buyer agent commission virtually optional. You know,
What do you mean by optional? Because I think it's the exact opposite. Go ahead.
well, I think that if you've got a home that's in a desirable location, well, let me put it to you this way. Don't you hear more and more, you know, I found the damn home. I don't know why this agent's making 2.5%, 3% on this. I found every home. I pointed out to my agent. I told them what I wanted to offer. They put it in writing. Of course, we know that's, the buyer's agent does a whole lot more than that. But isn't that an incredibly prevalent notion there? So enable those people, empower those people, let them place their own offers. And let that transaction, let true innovation be paid for by the fact that if buyer's agents are really that useless, let them be outmoded. And so to me, that's what this looks like. All right. And on top of that, that this idea, the way you've got this set up, it makes the incumbent listing agent, an absolute rock star. They're like, you know what? Let's troll around, find the best offers. This is, you can do this in parallel to MLS. I've done this before. I've seen this play out, and I've seen people only have upside. You don't like the offers that come through, or there's a buyer's agent that comes through that we absolutely know is a pain in the ass. We don't take that offer. We move on to the next one. So I think this entrenches the incumbent listing agent, which I actually like. And I think the single biggest, I think you have a possibility to outmode that buyer agent commission, which is the single biggest impediment to innovation, in my opinion.
Well, I guess, Sam, I was thinking exactly the opposite, right? In that what ends up happening with us is the buyer agent no longer has to worry about getting paid. They don't have to. So one of the big things that our system does is it almost entirely eliminates steering, right? And this is at the center of all the lawsuits that are happening against NAR right now. This notion that buyer agents have been not showing homes, that aren't paying the full, 3% commission and all that stuff. This just eliminates all of that. To the extent, and I do think what will end up happening is exactly the opposite. In other words, a buyer might go in and say, hey, I can make my own bids. Can you really? I mean, do you know? So 15-day, waiver, how do you know what that's worth, right? How do you know, like, hey, should I bid on this? Is it just emotional? Or should you be talking to somebody? I actually think agents provide a tremendous amount of value. And I think what this allows them to do is to showcase that value on a more regular basis than they do today, quite frankly, because right now, when the buyer agent goes up and writes an offer, the client has no idea what they're doing, what the work is, right? With this, I think you end up seeing it on a more regular basis. But right now, I think the bigger sort of bonus really is, hey, buyer agents, you don't have to worry. You don't have to be concerned about if I work with this buyer, am I going to get paid? How do I prove my value? There are whole different ways of doing that, and I've my good friends. I don't think they've made it really public. I'm involved with a tech project that's going to really help agents sort of do that proving value. But I think this will also help, sort of guarantee that. Hopefully I'll answer your question. I think Derek was next. Drew, you want to?
Yeah, go for it, Derek.
Okay, great. Thanks. Hey guys, Rob, love the idea.
Thank you, Derek.
Looks like you are doubling down on the DOJ's potential decision to get rid of buyer's agency commission. So is that kind of where you're headed on this? You're pretty sure that's going to happen?
Right now I'm fairly certain that the Burnett case in Missouri will go against NAR at trial. I think NAR could maybe prevail in appeal, but that trial ruling is going to be a nuclear bomb. So
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, question. So these are all like just detail questions. So forgive me, but
oh no, like I said, I'm sure you're gonna have lots of questions, and my answers may include I don't know. So
okay, yeah,
go ahead.
fair. So the next question is, you said you're going to potentially have the ability to do contracting in the system.
Yeah.
Are you expecting and planning on using promulgated forms for that?
Yes.
Okay.
And the thing is, a lot of the forms that are used in the industry right now are copyrighted by realtors, so we're not doing that, right? We don't have the
Okay.
rights to use that. But in some states, the state publishes those forms, and they're public, in which case we can use those. Right.
So you can use Trek forms in Texas, but not TA.
For example, right.
Gotcha.
Right.
Disclosures. How do you want to handle? How are you going to handle mandatory disclosures?
The listing agent would make all the mandatory disclosures. In fact, I mean, so that part is no different, right? Just because we're auction doesn't mean you don't do disclosure. No, you got to do everything. You still have to comply with all the laws.
Nice,
right?
Greg.
Those aren't MLS rules. That's the law. Like, you have to comply.
Sure.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's fair. I'm assuming you're going to need an auctioneer's license in every state that you do this.
No, only a few states require auctioneer's licenses.
Okay.
Not all of them.
So I am a seller and I don't want to have a buyer's agent or a listing agent. I want to go unrepresented, or I'm a buyer and I want to go unrepresented. How do we handle that?
So if you're a seller, you want to go unrepresented right now, because we're in MLS, like, we don't really do that. But here's the thing. Why do you not want to go represented? The reason why people go FSBO is because they don't want to pay the commission.
Right.
On our system, you don't pay a commission anyway. Why not get represented?
Yeah, okay.
Right. So we think actually DPX would eliminate FSBO almost entirely. I don't see the reason why you would. I mean, who the hell wants to arrange showings? Like, it's like, have you ever tried to sell a car through Facebook or something? It's miserable. It's a nightmare. Nobody wants to do FSBO. It's just they just want to save the money. Okay, put it on DPX now. You can fully represent it. Have an amazing agent will help you out, and you don't pay a commission anyway. On the buyer side, I don't know. I mean, I suppose in some case I could see some buyers saying, well, I'm like, look, man, you're going to pay the buyer premium whether you represent it or not. Because the buyer premium is between you and us. Do you know what I mean? As an auction house.
Well, the difference is I can finance the buyer premium if I do it traditionally, and I can't through yours. So you're adding
yes, you can.
Down payment.
No. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that just comes into the purchase price of the home?
That's right.
And that's good with Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie Mae?
That is good with Fannie, Freddie, and everyone else. In fact,
cool.
Check this out. There's this like resource. Fannie Mae does allow final sale price to include the buyer premium. It has to be, quote, reasonable. But since the reasonable rate right now is 10 to 12%, we're pretty comfortable with it.
Yeah, okay.
With our 5%.
MLS business rules, days on market, statuses, all that stuff.
We have nothing to do with it. We allow the community to do that through DAO mechanisms.
Okay, nice.
Because I'm like, look, who the hell am I? I've never sold a house, right? Like, why would I set the rules for brokers and agents? They should set it for themselves.
And then, is there like a floor? As not, if I want to list my house, can I set it? I'll sell it, but I'm not going to sell it for less.
Right, the reserve price.
Yeah,
so
reserve
price. This is an actual live listing. This is the test, if you will, that we're doing through this early beta. Starting price 275, reserve not met.
Cool. So there is no way to even be a buyer. I mean, you can be a buyer unrepresented, but you still pay in the full 5%.
Right. So you might as well get the help of a competent buyer's agent to give you some advice on bidding.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like it.
So let me actually show you a little of that while we're waiting on this thing.
I think you can refresh. They said someone on your team fix that.
All right, well. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys that in a second. Because I do think this is interesting. Where was so let's look at this one. This one's live, right? You go to place a bid. So you select the client you're doing this for. And this is what sort of the bidding process looks like. Could a consumer do it? Yeah, I guess. But, I mean, think about, you want to do all of this. I just don't know, right? So let's just put something out there. Minimum total. Because the minimum needed is 300. Sellers requiring nothing, but I'm gonna say 10,000. I don't want to do any of that. I mean, you know, this is an important thing in Arizona. Well, as a consumer, do you really have any idea what appraisal shortfall with a max means? I don't, right?
Couldn't
You know,
couldn't
negotiable
Google that in
warranty. I
5
don't know.
minutes?
Do I? Right? I think a buyer agent is going to be very, very helpful. And I think for the buyer, you're going to pay the 5% anyway. You might as well get an agent to help you.
Yeah, that makes sense. One last question on the data
Yes.
set. That's going to be. Are you going to use like RESO standard?
Yes.
API? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, that was it. Thank you for answering all those.
You're welcome.
So
Who's
there's
next?
there's a question that was in the chat from Nick, and also sounds like the same question from Matthew. Matthew, you want to ask it?
Yeah, I was going to ask that anyway. But first of all, Rob, awesome, very exciting stuff. It feels like you're bringing together all the articles that you've written into a solution, right? So, yeah, very exciting. My question is really what Nick also posted on the chat, which was, do you expect this to be exclusively listed here or in parallel with other MLSs? Because then the terms change, right? And if the buyer comes along.
No, I think what you know, we're sort of run in parallel, right? Put in the MLS because you know that's really where the market is today. Also put it in here because they're completely different in a way, right? Like we're an auction platform. And you belong to the other MLS. And you know, every MLS I know has a rule that says you must enter your listing into the MLS within 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is. We would never encourage anyone to violate rules or anything, right? And we don't, it's weird, man. Like I've actually talked to MLS. Like I've not been trying to backstab anybody. Like Armless knows where we've launched. You know, I've talked to Bright MLS about it. I've told other MLSs about it. They're like, yeah, okay, cool. You're an auction platform. Right. I think there's way where we just end up partnering. So we're not telling anyone to stop putting it into the MLS or anything like that. It's just this is a totally different thing. We have to be an MLS because we just can't abide by all of the different rules of the MLS and still do what we need to do.
But if the same buyer buys it through the MLS or could buy it through the same MLS, they would be saving some money, right?
Well, I guess if the buyer does it through that, then and the seller is willing to do it that way, then yeah, we're not messing with it. If you do it off our platform, that has nothing to do with us.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, I suppose in theory the buyer's quote saving some money. The problem is the seller now has to pay it. So it's like somebody's got to pay the commission. Somebody has to pay it. Right.
Excellent. And you make your cut, I guess, in that 5%.
We take you take 25 basis points from each side. And that 25 basis points can go down to 5 basis points, depending on usage. That's a level of detail. Like more transactions you do, more DMLS tokens you earn, which means more voting power, but it also could lead to discounts. So you could get it down to 5 basis points.
Nice. Thanks, Rob.
You're welcome.
Inez.
Oh,
what's happening?
Rob and Drew and everyone. How are ya?
Great.
So I'm going to premise this with, Rob, you know I love you. That's like a red flag. I'm going to play devil's advocate here with the whole transparency thing. Auctions for and you know, transparency is something that I really, really, really believe in. But when it comes to negotiating, transparency may not be your best friend. Yes, we just went through a crazy market where we were getting bidding wars with multiple offers, prices above asking, especially in South Florida. That was like just crazy stuff. Now, if I would have had an auction with my listings where I was getting $200,000 and $300,000 above market price, my sellers would have never gotten that. They would have gotten a lot less. So I think there's something to be said about the listing agent just having some I'm a fierce negotiator and I'm a listing agent and I'm going to get the most money possible for my seller using all the rules that are offered to me by NAR, state and local, and disclosing what I need to disclose. But my job here is to get that seller the most amount possible. If we go auction, like I think of all the auctioneers here in Miami, When the property is ready to go to auction is when that seller is at its last, like, okay, whatever, I'm gonna do it this way. And they're very particular. They get 8% above asking, that goes to the auctioneer. So it's a little complicated. But my whole question to you is, yeah, transparency sounds really sexy, but at the end of the day, you know, when you're selling your most valuable asset as a seller, you want to try to get the most money possible. If you're trying to represent the buyer, obviously that transparency is freaking awesome. You know, that's where you want it. But from the seller side, not so much. So that's my question to you.
Okay,
is,
let me ask you this.
Go for it.
It's a great point, and here's the thing. I think that is more of a conversation around auctions in general, right? And so we can basically have a philosophical disagreement about, the impact of auctions. But here's the question I would have as a seller. Let's say I'm your client, I'm the seller. You bring me an offer that's 300,000 over asking. Why couldn't I get 350 over asking? How do I know? So in other words, that's $1 million house. You bring me an offer for 1.3 million. How do I know that's market price?
Well, it's what you got. So when we are in multiple offers,
I got through close bidding. Hold on, I got through you. Can you guarantee that 1.3 was market price? Is there somebody that might have bid 135?
No,
right? Is there someone in an auction situation when they see?
I get it.
You see what I'm saying? And that's the transparency of the seller side, right?
No, but now my question to you is this: the listing is in the MLS. You got 20 offers.
Sure.
And the seller's seeing those 20 offers in front of them. Are you saying that your platform is gonna expose the listing more because it's on your platform? So that means that I'm not gonna get 20, I may get 30.
Well, I mean, it's in the MLS.
If I had a property at $1 million.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the numbers of who's offering, $1.5 million, $1.010 million, $1.020 million.
Right.
So yeah, I think definitely it's philosophical. We could be here but I see your point.
Yeah, and I think and again, this is something I'm real curious about finding out too, right? But if you look at every other auction, so bring a car, bring a trailer for cars or eBay or, whatever, right? What you end up finding is you end up with bids, and then it sort of usually boils down to two bidders, right? Boils down to two people who really want it. And then they just keep outbidding each other until one says, all right, that's enough. I'm done. I think even in real estate, that mechanic will take place. So maybe you start with 20 offers, to your point, right? So there's 20 bids on this $1 million property. It keeps getting bid up, 1.2, 1.3, and one's just gonna go, you know what? I'm out. I'm done. I can't afford it anymore. That is actual market price, right? And I think this ends up helping the seller as well as the buyer. Right. Especially in this market. Yeah.
I see this really powerful in a normal market, in a balanced market where there's no multiple offer situations. I see this just really, really working. In a crazy market, which we don't know if we'll ever have one like that again. That was just nuts. But obviously, I think it has definitely potential. And thank you for humoring me.
Oh, no. These are the exact type of questions. The one thing I will mention, though, the crazy market, we're in a crazy market now, right? Especially in Phoenix, which is where we're launching, because it's this downward market. There's a number of people who feel like, oh yeah, Rob, this is great if you're in a hot buyer's market, but what about in a seller's market? In a real seller's market, in a real buyer's market like we have now, I think one of the biggest values of open auctions is price discovery, right? And in fact, this is the conversation I need to be having with everyone. It's like, look, in a market where you don't know what's happening because it's just absolutely insane, start the minimum bid low, put the reserve price where you want it to be. And then at a minimum, at the very least, you can go back to your seller and say, hey, listen, there have been 20 bids and it turns out your house is worth 800. This is what the market's telling you. This is not me. I'm not trying to get you to drop your price. This is what the market has told you after 2 weeks at auction or whatever it is, right? I think that's also really valuable to both agents and to the sellers. But we'll find out,
Rob, can I jump in here for a second? So
sure.
Great. Sorry, guys. I just have a couple comments and answers to some of these points as well, Rob, if you'll indulge me. I think that to Rob's point, it shows a seller, of course, what the actual market is. And those of us who actually sell real estate and understand that we're dealing with sellers that still think we live in a different time, right? So it's a good tool for that, but also, and as to your point, there are many times, depending on geographically where you are, where yes, our responsibility, our fiduciary responsibility as an agent is to do what's in our client's best interest, right? And sometimes we default to that being price, and sometimes that's not the main goal, right? So something like this, which provides a buyer and a buyer's agent transparency into these things are important to the seller, right? Maybe they'd be willing to take anywhere between 3 and 4. They're fine with it, seriously, or 3 and 350. Anywhere in there is good with them, especially if they're not paying commissions out of it, right? It's being added in the premium. But they don't want to deal with the inspections. They don't want to deal with this. If a buyer knows that, the seller's goal is to sell the house. And in some of these areas in the market we're in now, they're struggling to sell the house, right? Because they're up here in the old mentality and the buyers are way down here. So the transparency of it allows a buyer's agent and a listing agent to really show what's important to the sellers and find that buyer that's willing to hit all those buttons, not just price. So I think that's one of the cool things about this that we don't get in a traditional MLS experience, right? Because to your point, you're going over 20 offers with your seller in a seller's market. And as anyone who's ever represented a buyer knows, their first question is, I don't even think my offer got presented, right? I would have come up, I don't know, I didn't even get a rejection, right? So some of this accounts for the lack of communication that we see in our industry, and overall as a platform being able to see it all at a glance and knowing from the buyer and the seller side that this is what the terms were is pretty impressive. That we've kind of kept as in our inner circle as a realtor community for years and years and years, right? And this is, to Rob's point, what the lawsuits are heading towards. I watch these obviously very carefully, but I think we will very quickly here have to deal with the fact that the traditional way, that's the way it's always been done, thinking is going to have to change whether we like it or not. So it's kind of a leg up, a beginning point here to start that process and have something in place to replace the traditional. Not to replace the real estate community, but the traditional way of doing it.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And thank you, MF. And I think the thing that I don't want to leave out is I actually think this ends up being a lot more efficient for the agents, right? So we can obviously see in the last 2 years of the crazy ass, like hot sellers market, like buyer agents don't have to be writing dozens, offer after offer after offer. You could just go, listen, just go bid, right? On the seller side, the listing agent doesn't have to now look at 6, 7 different, offers and then try and make sense of them and then go to the seller and be like, hey, which one do you want to take? Just let the system do its work and then look, boop, there's the winner. And then we just notify all the winners. I do think this ends up saving agents a lot of time. And I do think it's worth mentioning, like every buyer's agent I know personally, like they love their clients. They don't want to see their buyer clients just suffer heartbreak and frustration and all of that stuff. So with an open auction, man, you just don't have that, right? Like you don't go, I fell in love with this house and then I didn't get it and I have no idea why. You fell in love with the house, but you didn't get it because you decided at some point, I'm not bidding anymore. I'm out. That's the different type of heartbreak. But anyway, cool. Drew, is there anyone else? These are great questions, man.
Steve has his hand up briefly, but then took it down. So I don't know if Steve has a question or not, but anyone else, either put it in the chat or raise your hand.
I did have a question. It was more in regards to the lawsuits that are taking place, that from what I've gleaned from them, they have to do with one side unwillingly or unknowingly paying for the other side's commissions. And so if that's the nature of the case, if the buyer side pays the entire commission, it's just shifting it, right? Or is it different? Am I misunderstanding?
Yeah. So I think the way I kind of see it, the lawsuits really have to do with these various rules that NAR and the MLSs have, the cooperation compensation rule, that seems to suggest that you're artificially inflating the commission amount because, and at the heart of it is steering, right? The idea is that the listing agent would go to the seller would have hey, this commission seems awful high. And, there are videos out there like this, right? There's training materials that say things like, you tell the, seller, hey, listen, it's not me. I'm going to charge you my 2% or whatever it is. But if you don't pay the buyer's agent, they're not going to show your house, right? So at the heart of it was the steering thing. With what we're offering, there's no steering. There's literally no steering. Why? Because there's no commission. We just charge an auction premium, which every auction website does. And then what we do with our money afterwards, that's nobody else's business, and it causes no steering, right? Because the buyer agents know they're going to get paid whether they show this house, that house, or the other house. So I think it's really distinguishable from sort of the lawsuits that are happening right now. I think it's actually, if I would say so myself, it's a bit of a clever workaround to the real threats to the industry on the compensation front. Hey, Greg is back.
Yeah, I get that you're talking that the technology really is just background, blockchain, whatever, anything else. But there have been other auction platforms out there.
Yeah.
Right. Have you looked at these other, property auction platforms and diagnosed or kind of said what is better about this than the existing auction platforms that are out there now?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, like someone like Dorsey, someone like Concierge, all these guys, like the fundamental problem is that they're not the MLS, that they built an auction on top of the existing MLS rails, existing MLS framework, and it's not really possible to do that.
Well, you're saying you can put this on an MLS and use this, right? So
yeah, but we are it's like putting it to two different MLSs, right? So we don't have to deal with sort of the other MLS's 160 pages of rules. Do you know what I mean? Whereas all the other auction platforms do.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, Dorsey's a great example of it. Like great guys, great tech, but because they have to comply with all of the MLS's rules, it's very, very hard, right? And then because of that, you have this additional cost component, right? Because the MLS requires cooperation compensation, so the consumers save no money, and then Dorsey has to charge a fee on top of it. We don't. Like for the consumer, this is exactly neutral.
Hey, Rob.
Yes.
Nick here, one of the co-founders of Dorsey. How are you doing, man?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good. So I'm curious, because that last question was a good one. Like, if you are an extra MLS, how are you kind of dealing with the exclusive right to sell? To me, that's where Bring a Trailer is so powerful, is because there are consequences if you essentially sell it somewhere else, and that's why they have this sort of captive community of buyers and sellers.
When we sell it somewhere else, you have the exclusive right to sell belongs to the agent and the broker, right? But we'll say the agent, right?
Yeah.
So we're not saying that a different agent could list the same house on our platform, right? You have to upload the listing agreement.
Yeah. What I mean is, how you kind of said, Dorsey was built on the existing MLS rails, which is true. Yeah. I'm just curious, how yours is different, because if, an agent is listing the same home on two different MLSs, why does anyone have to go through yours?
Oh, they don't have to. Well, we're not saying they have to. What we're saying is if you do, then these things, then these benefits. So
well, I guess why would they? It's a better question. Why would they if it costs more?
For the seller, the fact that I don't have to pay a commission is a pretty big deal. Literally, at closing, I'm not writing you a check for $30,000. I think the seller, even if we get into sort of economic theory about it's going to be the same, psychologically, man, that's a pretty big deal that I don't have to pay a commission, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And for the buyer, they might want to do it through this platform because of the transparency. So they know oh, okay, I'm winning this. Oh, I got outbid by 5,000. You know what? I'm willing to go another 5,000 above that. Okay, I got the house. We're not requiring that they close on our platform. That's the important thing, right?
Yeah.
Sell it however.
Will you be syndicating to Zillow and the other portals? Is that how people will find you?
Yeah, I mean,
that was one of the big challenges for us.
Yeah, it's not even syndication. We're an MLS, so anybody who wants the data, just come get it, right? And by the way, like the data side of this, like that's a level of detail, but our team, we're just building like standard API key type stuff. So you don't have the provisioning stuff. There's not 90 days of bureaucratic like hoops to jump through and board meetings to approve you. It's like, just come in, get your API key, get the data, boom, gone.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's Sam, you took your hand down. Do you still have something you want to comment on?
No, I think it was answered. I think so. I'm good.
All right.
There's a couple of things in the chat.
I'm looking at, yeah.
Looks like there's a quick question from Steven.
Okay.
Does bidding transparency present itself during or after the auction for the world to see?
It's both during and after. So during the auction, this is maybe a level of detail no one really cares about. All the bids are actually recorded on a public blockchain, so you could see them. Afterwards, they're saved in kind of the house ledger and in our records, so you can see the entire bid process. I do think it's important for market participants to know, what's happening, what's happened, so they can see it, and it should inform kind of future behavior as well. Once it's sold, though, that's all gone. Like now the data is about as private as you can make it, and the homeowner kind of owns that data. And that's the whole house ledger piece, which we didn't really get into, but that's like one of the back-end tech pieces. Are those me?
I have a question.
Yes.
Just thinking from a traditional like real estate practice, if let's say you have, as you mentioned, there are usually two bidders that are pretty can be the most competitive between each other, and the rest may or may not be. If someone wins the auction, goes into contract, then falls out, you've seen all the bids, the next highest guy, why would they stay at their number? Why wouldn't they go down to $1 above what the lower one was? Or in a situation where they're bidding, it's like you're dealing with multiple bids. One of the issues I have seen in some of the auctions that have taken place is that it sets an artificial low. And then what happens when the reserve's not met? And so those things, I agree with you that as far as like when there's a competitive market, competitive buyers going for the same property, auctions are usually the best way to get to that last dollar. But it's these kind of situations that actually occur quite often that I'm trying to figure out how would those be navigated?
There were a lot of questions in there, Steve. So I'll answer the last one first. If reserve is not met, then you don't have to sell. It's that simple, right? But what it does do is it gives you a pretty good idea what the market value for your home is right now, today, right? And I think this is going to be really important this year and probably in the next couple of years as we are in this like, sort of down market, if you will, where sellers still have all sorts of unrealistic expectations about what their house should be worth. It's one thing for your agent to tell you based on my CMAs and this and that, hey, I think your house is worth 500. It's a whole other thing for the market after 15 bids to be like, your house is a 450, right? So that's where the reserve would come into play. The other points, I mean, to be honest, this is where I maybe invoke the I don't know. Like we have to see how this plays out, right? Because we've never really had something like this in real estate, So I guess we'll find out. Based on other auction markets, I think what we end up seeing is people could try and play all sorts of games, but as long as it's open, transparent, and then the market has exposure to it, the price you end up with is the market price. If the second place guy comes in and tries to play games, there's no guarantee that a third person doesn't come in and go, oh, hey, check this out, right? I'm going to outbid that, right? So there has to be some level of faith, which I have, that if you have a true open auction, at the end of the day, what you end up is the market price.
Rob, real quick, I think I shared this with you when we discussed this a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, but I really think this is a really interesting use case for fractionals, like fractions of properties. Like I think if you could auction off pieces, I think it could get pretty interesting because the dollar value would obviously be much lower, and there's you don't deal with the whole I'm gonna live in this house, and it's a different beast than if it's a kind of thing you're gonna use for either an investment or a Picasso type use case.
Yep. Yep. And that the only thing I'll say about that is we don't have a ban against that, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the other thing that those of us who are in the industry maybe should think about is our rules are like 10 pages long versus the average MLS with 160. We just don't feel like we're in the business of telling brokers and agents like how to run their business. Right. The rules we have are meant to protect transparency. And then whatever the brokers and agents themselves come up with through DAO mechanisms, great, do that. Like we don't want to have anything to do with it. You know, we're just going to maintain the tech and keep the thing running. When you think about how that's going to play out, sort of the fundamental transformation of governance, I do think that that's an important piece for industry insiders like us to at least think about.
There's another quick question in the chat
Yes.
from Dave Conroy.
Yes.
Are those making offers then need to sign transactions or keep track of private keys?
It's a great question, David. I don't think they do because right now, look, man, I can't wait until we can go full Web3 and allow for like MetaMask, you know, integration. I think right now we're going to do things through custodial wallets. So, you know, we are going to sign it. They don't need to keep track of private keys. They don't need to do that. It is something that I can't wait for that to come. Yeah. But yes, we are signing the transactions. Just on their behalf, custodial wallet.
Anyone else have any questions, comments? We're coming up on the hour.
Yeah. And I'll hang out. I mean, if y'all have, like, you just want to yell at me and be like, you're crazy. I mean, I'm totally open to that too.
I'll just say from the new construction side of things, probably what you've already talked about, and I came on late for the whole hour, is icing on the cake for those folks. The main pain point is builders and developers hate interacting with MLSs because they can't syndicate from their own content management systems. And so they're paying $100, $250 flat fee per listing to get a home in the MLS through a broker. They've got teams of people that are coordinating paperwork back and forth. And so it dramatically simplifies and lowers costs for new construction.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to build that out in the next couple of weeks and hoover it up. Yeah, and then again, there's going to some tech side of this where, like, if you guys, we have one listing, so I don't imagine you guys will be doing this now, but give us a month or two. And when you need to get the data out of our system to use in your tech platform, it will feel like a different world. Cool. Anyone else?
So when you're paying the listing agent and the buyer's agent, you're paying them for a transaction, but you're not paying a percent. You're paying a fee, or is it really calculated as a percent?
It's a percent, 2.5% each.
And so, and is it considered a commission?
So legally speaking, it would be considered a quote referral, but that's something that MF and I are working through.
And it gets paid to their brokerage as it
to their broker, correct, like normal.
So just for the heck of it, I mean, since it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, why don't you just have a little box in there that lets the buyer's agent or the consumer, if they're entering in the offer for themselves, dictate the commission that they're willing to work for, so that if they're willing to work for 1.25%, then perhaps their offer looks 1.25% better.
Because I think to go down the commission route, we get wrapped right into the current sort of process that is under attack, right? Keep in mind, what we're charging is not a commission. What we're charging is a buyer premium that every auction website charges. And then what we do with our money afterwards is our business, not the buyer, the seller, the government's business, right? If we start saying the buyer agent's actually taking this and then setting a commission, now we're in the commission world, right? And then we get into the whole questions and issues and trouble. So I wanted to just avoid that. But having said that, Sam, wait, hold on. Having said that, if a year from now the community's looking at it and they're saying, hey, based on our experience, we think we should, cool. We'll entertain at that time.
Yeah. It's just that it's based on the purchase price. It's calculated as a commission, as a percentage, and it's paid to the broker. That walks like a duck.
Again, it's not paid to the broker, it's paid to us.
No, but then it's paid from you to the broker, right?
Correct.
You can't pay the agent. I
Correct.
mean,
No,
if it wasn't a commission, you could pay the agent.
I think even if it's not commission, you
can
still
pay
have
a
to pay the
consulting.
broker.
You can pay a consulting fee to an agent. It doesn't have to.
Oh,
go
sure.
for-
Yeah.
That
It's not a
thing
consulting
walks
fee.
like a duck, Rob. So I mean, it's not that I doubt this is going to work. It works, but I just don't know why you wouldn't put in one more little drop down menu that says, "What are you prepared to work for?" Which sort of gets right to the heart of I found that house. I told my agent what to do. I don't think my agent should be making 2.5%. So let him have a drop down.
The way I look at it, I didn't want to do that because it sort of makes things too complicated. However, here's the thing. Between the buyer agent and the buyer, if they strike some deal, that's between them. That has nothing to do with us. Right. So, so for example, we know that Redfin used to, I don't know if they still do anymore, but they used to the buyer rebate. You want to give your buyer rebate, have at it, right? That has nothing to do with us. Send the escrow instructions to whatever you need to do. But that's between you and your client. We're not interfering with that one way or the other.
Yeah, fair enough.
And truthfully, today, a buyer doesn't even really know what their agent is making. Unless it's a discussion and the buyer asks for some rebate or reduction in commission. So there is no transparency on that today because they don't see that part.
You have user accounts for both the agent and the client in here. You could theoretically put a little section that's kind of does that agreement of what are you going to make and have them both digitally sign it or something.
Yeah. In theory. And it's like one of those features that maybe we'll develop out because believe me, there's a bunch that we have to build before that. I think we have to see does this work? It's just something that the marketplace really wants, right? And we've designed this in a way to be as industry friendly and as consumer friendly as possible. All right.
Anyone else, or should we wrap? Well, this is recorded. I will post it to YouTube as a private link later today, and then I'll post that on the Jam event invite, and then you all can share it privately with other people if you'd like.
Cool.
Good stuff.
Well, thanks everybody. This was fun.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, well done,
You're
Rob.
so welcome.
Thank you
And
for
now we're
giving us
live.
some controversy today.
All right. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.